What do I have to say to the people who say Kassanti has too much with too much in his kit? I think there's some interesting things to say about Kassanti. One of the things I always think is really interesting is when like the average player gets all up in arms about Kassanti. Because I'm not going to say Kassanti's perfectly balanced, but I guarantee you that if you play against him, you'll just win, right? Like, one of the things about Kassanti that's interesting, and other pro characters like Azir, is that, well, playing against them for the average player is not where the crazy stuff is, because for the average player, those characters are incredibly weak. And if you see someone playing them, you should generally, like, clap your hands and be like, thanks for the free MMR. Now, that doesn't mean that character feels fair or is fair, right? Like, the character is very strong in pro play. It turns out. And so I would say, yeah, he probably long term needs a bit more work to get him more scaled, into the right spot. But generally, we're eventually able to get characters there. Akali got there, SYLAS got there, ZERI got there, right? And Kassanti probably is in that camp of like needing some work. There's very few characters who are just going to permanently be in pro jail. It's really just like, historically, it's like Azir, Callista, and for the longest time, Ryze, right? Another thing I'll say is like, you'll be like, well, why did you even make a guy like that, right? Well, one of the very, very important parts about champion design is we take risks. It is very, very important that we take risks. And risks mean that sometimes we won't get it right. Sometimes a character will come out and they'll be like, too good in the hands of pro players, or too frustrating to play against, or things like that. But for every character we make like that, first of all, very often we're able to just tune them, right? So for every character we make like that, a lot of times it's like, well, after a couple patches, they'll be fine. Like, people were flaming me when VIEGO came out, when he like showed up in pro, and then we nerfed him twice, and he was fine forever after, right? So, I guess we've already gotten this. And so that's one thing to think about, is just like, a lot of times when we take a risk, it only takes a couple patches to get a character in a good spot. Now, that's not the case for Kassanti or ZERI. Those characters are, Kassanti's still not in the best spot, and ZERI took a while, right? So that's not perfect. But again, I think it's really, really important that we do take risks, though. Because risks are what get us characters like YASUO, or SYLAS, or VIEGO, or JHIN, or Hwei, as examples, right? You got to take risks to do crazy stuff to make, like, compelling characters that are going to, like, mix up how you think about the game. And that just means that, we're not always going to get it right, and it's on us to follow up and do our best to get it into a good spot if it doesn't come out perfectly. But I personally believe that it's a significantly better spot to be in than a world where we listen to, say, the angry Reddit haters, and we just make characters who don't do anything that is different, right? Is Kassanti a reasonable amount of damage? Kassanti might not be. Now, he is supposed to turn into a skirmisher when he ults, which means he is going to do some damage. So a question would be like, how is he doing that damage? How accessible is his kill pattern? How far away can he do it? What does he give up to do that damage? Like, as an example, let's say Kassanti turns into Skirmisher Kassanti and can kill you from full very easily, but then he has 10 health. I'm like being like very hyperbolic here. But then it's like, oh, well, okay, so to get the ability to kill you in full, he also will instantly die to an auto attack, right? Now, again, that's hyperbolic. That's not correct. Like, that's not necessarily something that is true or real, but it's kind of the example of like, for a character like Kassanti, if he is, going into this mode where he can kill you, there's a lot of things we could do to that mode in terms of tuning to make it so that it's actually very reasonable that he can kill you, right? So that's just something to think about. A question is, the Balon team's intention that tanks do damage? Tanks should deal damage. That is incredibly intentional. Is it intentional? Now, is the current damage of tanks correct? I don't know. I haven't been like keeping up with the meta enough to tell you if currently tanks are doing too much damage or whatnot. But if you die to a tank and you're like, that wasn't fair, that tank killed me, it's like, tanks should be able to kill you sometimes. Especially if you're low and over a longer period of time. Now, tanks one-shotting you, that's probably not good. Tanks instantly killing you from full, that's probably not good. But a tank killing you over 10 seconds, or killing you when you're low, that is totally reasonable and within the bounds of what a tank should be doing. Tanks need to be able to put some degree of threat on you with their threat of kills, not just their threat of CC. we had a version of tanks that was really CC based and didn't do any damage, and it ended up just being really bad because it basically created a class of characters who are only viable in pro play. Because pros really like characters who can like do a ton of utility, which they had to have to make up for the fact that they couldn't kill anybody. And everybody who isn't a pro tends to prefer characters who actually have some degree of personal agency. So it ended up being like a pretty rough spot for tanks to be in when they couldn't kill anybody ever and just had a ton of utility. That's like mainly just a pro play thing and not really viable for the average player. Tanks to some degree need to put threat on you with their bodily presence. And part of that is through CC, and part of that is through if you run past me, you might die. The tanks are one-shotting me. So if that's actually true, that's maybe something we should be worried about. But I'm going to be real and say that a lot of times when someone says that tank one-shot me, what they actually mean is that tank killed me from full over 10 seconds and I couldn't kill them. And I'm just going to be real with you, that is a totally reasonable thing for a tank to do. If a tank walks up to you as a squishy 80 carry and you can't kill them and they kill you over 10 seconds from full, that's okay. That's allowed. That's like part of like what it means to be a tank. The hope then would be that like if you had your team with you in a grouped setting, that tank wouldn't be able to do that, right? But like it is totally reasonable for a tank to get tanky enough to not die while still being able to kill you over an extended period of time. That is okay. It is less okay for them to do that, like say in 2 seconds. That's pretty messed up, right? It's less okay for them to be able to like do that in a team fight where you're like your team just is trying to peel them off and they don't care and they just kill you while being invincible. Like that's less okay. But like there are situations where a tank is going to get to the point where you can't kill it and it can kill you, and that's okay. That's a thing that can happen. I feel like a lot of people in the chat might be talking about Zac. Zac's an interesting character because he's like this hybrid tank fighter. And I'm not going to say he's perfectly balanced. But tanks as a whole do need to be able to have kill threat. That's just a thing that needs to be true. Warmog's armor has HP gated healing, which I think is cool. Why is Blade of the Ruined King on hit effect not HP gated as well? For instance, you need 1300 bonus HP to get Warmog's Heart. Why don't you need an opponent to have 900 bonus HP to get Blade of the Ruined King's on hit effect? I mean, I guess my question is like, I think you're just not making the best comparison. Like those items like have no real relation to each other. And so the first question I would ask is like, different things have different needs, right? Like, and so like, I guess my question would be, it's like, what would be the point of making Blade of the Ruined King like literally only good against people who have tons of bonus health, right? It's already mostly good against people who have bonus health just because of how current health damage works. And so like when you put a gate like that on something, you're heavily like constricting what it's good against or useful for, which can be good, by the way, depending on what you want, right? Like as an example, Set's ultimate only does bonus damage based on bonus health instead of total health because we're like, we really want that bonus damage really to be about if Set picks up a tank or not, right? But like Blade of the Ruined King, it's like, that's a fighter item. Fighter items generally need to be pretty generic to actually be functional. That doesn't mean fighter items can't have specific things they're good at. As an example, Blade of the Ruined King, like, helps you against tanks. But like, Blade of the Ruined King would be a significantly worse item if it was only good against tanks. Because bruisers, when they buy their first item, tend to need to be pretty close to complete after buying it. Otherwise, it tends to be a terrible item on them. Because bruisers just have so many different needs as that class of champion. And so, like, mainly it's just like, I think they're different items with different needs. But the one thing Blade of the Ruined King does not need is some restriction that says literally only good against tanks.